is the lesson for the Centroid project. And so let's take a look at what a centroid is. And so a centroid is just a point on an object in which all the mass seems to concentrate. And so if we go ahead and try to find the centroid, what we're going to end up doing is first finding the midpoints of each line segment of our figure. And we're going to draw these lines called medians from the midpoint to the opposite vertex, and then we're going to go ahead and see that all those lines end up coinciding. So let's take a look at an example here. And so here's a triangle, and what I'm going to end up doing is measuring the lengths of each of these sides. So if I go ahead and attach a ruler, put a ruler right next to this side right here, I see that this distance is about 13.9 centimeters. So I'm going to take 13.9, and I'm going to cut that into two equal pieces. So I'm going to divide it by 2. And so half of 13 is 6.5, and then half of 9 is 0.45. And so if I add those two together, I end up getting 6.95. So if I go over 6.95 spaces, so 6 95/100ths of a centimeter, I'm just going to put a little dash right there. And so that is the midpoint. And so I'll do that to the next line segment, and I'll go ahead and measure this one, and I measure this one about 9 1/10. So about 9 1/10. If I cut that into two equal pieces, half of 9 is 4 5/10, half of 1 is 0.005, and that makes 4.55, or 4 55/100ths. So I'll go ahead and measure that over, and so I go over to 4 55/100. So there's 4.5 right there. 4.6 is one line over, so 4 55/100ths is right in between the two. So moving on to my next line, I see that the distance from the two vertices is about 5 4/10 of a centimeter. So when I divide that by 2, that leaves me with dividing 5 by 2, I get 2.5. Dividing 4/10 by 2, I get 0.2. And so adding those two numbers gives me 2 7/10. So then I'm going to go ahead and measure out 2 7/10. So there's 2.5, 2.6, 2.7. So I've got that line too. So now I've got the medians, or the midpoints. Now I'm going to draw the medians. And so the medians are those lines that go from the midpoint to the opposite vertex. And so I'm going to go ahead and line the ruler up with the midpoint.
Pierce, please report to room 2. Carrie Pierce, report to room 2.
And I'll line up the ruler along the midpoint to the opposite vertex, leaving a little bit of a gap so I can fit my pencil lead in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw the line between that midpoint to the opposite vertex. I'll do the same thing with all the others. So I go from the midpoint to the opposite vertex. And then I'll draw that line between those points. And so when I line that up, draw that line, and then do the one last line, the one last median from the midpoint to the opposite vertex. And so when I go ahead and draw this line, what I'll end up seeing is that all the points end up coinciding at one point. And so you can see how all those points, all those lines, all those medians coincide at this point. And so this point we call the centroid. And so it's where, if we were to cut this out, we could end up balancing this triangle right at that point. These lines right here are called the medians, and this point at which we draw the median along this line segment is called the midpoint. And then we draw it to an opposite vertex. These are vertices as well, but they are not opposite of this line. And so if I was to draw a line from this midpoint to this vertex, it would be right alongside that line segment. That's not what I want to do. I want to draw it to the opposite vertex. And so that's the vertex I draw it to. So let's take a look at our problem that we're going to end up seeing. And what we'll end up having is a piece of paper that has what the centroid is about and telling us what we should do. It says, using this piece of paper, we're going to cut out a triangle containing the directions and the rubric. Then on the back side of this page, we're going to label the midpoint, And then each side we're going to draw 3 medians, and from those medians we'll see that they'll connect together to make the centroid, and that's what we're going to end up seeing here. So it first says, using this piece of paper, we're going to cut out a triangle containing the directions. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line. Now it doesn't matter where you draw this line, there's many ways of doing this. I'm going to draw a line above the directions, straight across. And then I'm going to draw a line going down at an angle. So I'm going to have it, I'll have it cut off my name and period. That's okay as long as I maintain the directions. So I'll go ahead and draw this line going down this way and draw it all the way down. And then I'll do the same thing going down from this side. So I don't have to go all the way to the end, just making a triangle. So once I have that, and you can see on this other side, they come down to that point there. And so the main thing is you're going to maintain the directions and the rubric. And so once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and cut it out. Once I get this cut out, I'm going to measure the lengths of each of the sides. So I think it's important to go ahead and cut it out first. That way, if you end up measuring the lengths of the sides, you might end up cutting out a portion of your triangle, and then it would be different. So I'm going to measure this side right here, and I see that it is a little over 23. So it's about 22 or 23 and a half. So on a separate sheet of paper, or maybe on this back side right here, I can write down 23. And that was about 23 and actually 2/10. We'll go with 23 and 2/10. So I'll take that number and I'm going to divide it by 2. And so I end up getting 1, and 2 goes into 3. We have 1 time. With 1 left over, it goes into 12 6 times. So 11 and 6/10 is that distance. So on this piece of paper, on this side right here, I'm going to measure 11 and 6/10, and I'm going to put a little line where 11 and 6/10 is very lightly. And so just a small little line so that I can see that point. And then I'm going to do that with the rest of the sides. So I've got this side right here. I measure as 25 or 23 and 5/10. So I'll go ahead and do the math on this side, 23.5. So I end up going in there. We have 2 goes into 23 11 times, 2 goes into 15. We have 7 times with 1 left over. So 2 goes into 10 5 times. So 11 and 75 hundredths. And so when I measure that, I'm going to go over 11, and then 7/10 is 2 spaces after the 5/10 marks, and then 7 and 8/10 is 3 spaces after the 5/10 mark. So it's in between those two. So I need to hold down the paper and hold it right next to the edge of the ruler and mark where 2 and 75 hundredths is. And so it's going to be right in between 2.7 and 2, or 11.7 and 11.8. And so the next one is this shorter line, and I see that it is only 20 and 8/10. So I'll turn it over and do the work on the back side. 20 and 8/10 divided by 2. 2 goes into 20 10 times. 2 goes into 8 4/10 of a time. So 10 and 4/10 is how many centimeters I need to go over in order to find the midpoint. So I'll go over 10 and 4/10 and put a little line there. Now I'm going to go ahead and draw the medians. So I draw the line from the midpoint to the opposite vertex. Again, make sure you leave a little bit of a gap so that you can fit your pencil in there. And I'm going all the way to this vertex. You can see how I went right into that vertex and then all the way down to the median. And I'm going to do that again with all the other lines from the midpoint to the opposite vertex. And so what I'll see once I do this is all of these lines end up coinciding at one point. This my last one here. From the opposite vertex down to the median, and so they should all coincide at this one point, and that is the centroid. So once you do that, then you're going to end up coloring in those sides to get the full credit. So far we've got on our rubric, we've got 3 midpoints. You get 3 points for that. You get the centroid. So in order to get the centroid, you have to have the midpoints, and then you get a creative design on the front side, then you'll get a point for that. And so again, if we take this and balance, put our pencil point right at this tip right here, and then hold it, it will balance right on the pencil. And so that's what we want to end up having it do. And so at the final stage, I'll show you an example of one that is completed. So this is an example of a student who completed their work, got full credit for it, and they ended up coloring in each of the quadrants. And again, you can do any kind of coloring you want or any design. So that's the Centroid project.